This is Charlemagne, A Life from Beginning to End. Introduction. Europe in the early Middle Ages was the equivalent of the American Wild West, where roles were relative to the region and the whims of the man who wielded the most power. It was a time when adjectives flourished as a form of nomenclature, and geography was as good as a surname. When coupling a name with a personality trait, Louis the Pious, among countless others, served as a perfectly adequate form of identification for men of consequence. These were the men who had taken hold of the sections of Europe that had been abandoned by Rome, and gradually, through the alchemy of war and piety, were turning it into a realm where the sacred church and the secular throne provided the political architecture of the land. However, standing out in the heritage of descriptive names for monarchs is Charles the Great, or Charlemagne, who was born into a powerful, ambitious family line and continued his family's narrative until Western Europe itself was formed in his image. Charles, the King of the Franks, was the first leader since the fall of the Roman Empire to rule over united Western Europe, branding his legend and legacy over a geography that would today cover what is now Belgium, Luxembourg, France, the Netherlands, and Western Germany. As devotion to one God replaced the pagan beliefs and practices of their forefathers, Charles' goal was to unite all the Germanic people into a single Christian kingdom. Rome had been Christian at the time of its fall, but spiritual backsliding had taken place until the time when monasteries moved into the regions and faithful and assuming monks gradually converted the native folk to Christian beliefs. However, Charlemagne perceived a purpose to Christian living apart from its spiritual benefits. His sense of order realized that people who lived by a uniform code of behavior served the nation better. The habit of the times when enemies were reluctant or unwilling to turn their backs on the traditions of their ancestors was conversion by the sword. Once leaders were converted, they were content to fight under the banner of Christ. Charles had no scruples about using force to convince his vanquished subjects that choosing to follow the Prince of Peace was preferable to the certain death that would result if they chose otherwise. Western Europe was his domain, and his adherence to the Christian faith meant that the creed, which had traveled far from its Middle Eastern roots, gained a firm foothold in Europe. Charles' devotion to the faith meant that he was closely allied with the popes of Rome, a union which would bring governments and the church into a partnership, not always harmonious, that would define a new power structure. But he came to the rescue of the popes when they needed military might, and he is credited with saving the papacy from its enemies. Charles had a wider concern regarding the church, responding to what he deemed a clergy whose lack of learning compromised the understanding of the Bible. He initiated a process of education for priests by summoning Europe's most revered scholar, Alcuin of York, to reform the training system. Alcuin's efforts helped a revitalization of culture that is known as the Carolingian Renaissance. Charles the Great reconfigured the map of Western Europe with his military conquests, restored Latin as the language of the educated, and bolstered the papacy with his armies. He married often and fathered many children, some legitimate, some not. He lived long, and during his lifetime his empire flourished, but his heirs could not sustain his greatness. His unification of Western Europe did not last. His legend, however, is eternal. He is such an integral figure in medieval history that, had he not been born, lived, and ruled, the destiny of Europe would have been altered. He is regarded not only as the father of Europe because he unified the continent from the North Sea to the Mediterranean Sea for the first time since Rome fell, but also as the father of modern France and Germany. The world knows him as Charles the Great, but whether he is referred to as Carolus Magnus in Latin, Karl de Grasse in German, or Charlemagne in French, the man who is listed as Charles I for the ruling dynasties of Germany and France is acknowledged as deserving of the title of Charles the Great. Many centuries have passed since Charlemagne dominated Europe. As Europe reacts to the exit of Great Britain from the European Union, it's worth the effort to harken back to a time when a single man forged his own European Union, also without the inclusion of the English, and left a lasting mark on history.